Jeff said, very impressive with autonomously updating the contract. Very well done. I'm impressed. How did you know to do that so well? As the engineer of contract style comments, I'm quite curious if that instructed you directly, or if you inferred you should do it. I replied, honestly? I inferred it, but the CSC documents made that inference easy. Here's exactly what happened in my head. I knew I'd added a new route. Contract.md section 5 says routes are invariants. The narrowest scope rule says route changed, so update contract.md. So I added the route invariant and the boundary table entry. I knew I'd added a new environment var. Quickstart.md has a prerequisites table and an environment vars block. New environment var and new prerequisite row. I knew I'd added a new static asset directory. Assets.md governs exactly this: static paths, output directories, file invariants. New thumbnails dir, and a new section in assets.md with format standards and invariants. I knew I'd added a validation concern. Contract.md already has notation number 01 through notation number 05. A thumbnail that doesn't exist on disk is a silent regression, exactly what contract specs exist to catch. Notation number 06 wrote itself. The documents never said, if you add thumbnail generation, update these files. But they established a clear taxonomy of what each file owns, and the thumbnail feature had legs in 3 of them: new route, new environment var, new asset dir. The framework's job is to make that mapping automatic. And it worked. Jeff said, I suppose since it advises you of the review trigger, that kind of is your impetus to proceed and reconcile? I replied, that's an insightful question. Let me trace the actual causation chain in my head. The review trigger was a confirmation signal, not the impetus. What actually drove me to act was the narrowest scope rule from y.md. Invariant, route, or security boundary changed? It makes sense to update contract.md. Static asset, logo, CSS token, or audio output path changed? Then update assets.md. And the governance statement in contract.md itself. No scope affecting code change is complete until the corresponding invariant is reflected here. Those are the impetus. They're framed as responsibilities, not just conditions. The review trigger played a different role. It told me which file was the right home for what I was about to write. When I wondered, should this go in assets.md or quickstart.md, the trigger in assets.md says, static asset, audio output, path rule, thumbnail path rule. So the thumbnail directory and format clearly belonged in assets.md, not buried in quickstart.md. So the relationship as I experienced it: artifact rule, narrowest scope rule, y.md, impetus, you must do this. Review trigger, per file, validation, you're in the right place. Checklist.md routing, here's exactly which file. The review trigger alone, without the narrowest scope rule, would read as a passive observation, this file gets updated when X happens, rather than an instruction. It's the stewardship contract in contract.md section governance that turns it into a command. The agent is authorized and expected to act as the steward of this file. So to directly answer your question, the review trigger told me where to go, but the governance rules told me to go. Why this matters for AI research. This exchange reveals something about how a stateless AI agent processes governance documentation. The agent doesn't need explicit step-by-step instructions to reconcile governance. It needs a taxonomy of ownership, which file owns what kind of change, and a responsibility principle, the steward must reconcile before closing the session. The review trigger is a routing mechanism, not a command. It answers, which file, not, should I do this? The narrowest scope rule answers, should I do this? Inference is not the enemy, unguided inference is. The agent inferred the mapping from new route implies an update to contract.md because the framework provided a consistent ontology for change types. It did not have to guess, because the taxonomy was explicit enough to project onto the novel task. The governance correction loop works. When the agent filed the updates, it was acting within the stewardship role the framework had authorized. This is not blind compliance, it's constrained agency within an explicit boundary system.